The letter, trembling in her hands, had arrived 3 weeks ago, and now Hannah Zimmerman stood on the dusty platform of Fort Bridger, Wyoming, watching the last wisps of steam from the departing train dissolve into the September sky of 1878, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her 22 years of life. She clutched her worn carpetbag tighter, scanning the rough faces of cowboys and settlers milling about, searching for a man she had seen only in a single photograph, a man who had promised her safety and a new beginning far from the crowded streets of Boston, where her father's gambling debts had left her with nothing but shame and desperation. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sagebrush and possibility across the frontier town that would become her home, and Hannah fought the urge to run back to the station and beg for passage east, back to familiarity, back to poverty perhaps, but at least to what she knew. The unknown stretched before her like the endless Wyoming sky, vast and terrifying and beautiful all at once. "Miss Zimmerman." The voice was deeper than she expected, rougher around the edges but not unkind. Hannah turned to find a tall man removing his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. He was older than his photograph suggested, perhaps 30, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard work and harder seasons. But his expression held a gentleness that made her shoulders relax just slightly. "I am Hannah Zimmerman," she confirmed, her Boston accent sounding foreign even to her own ears in this wild place. "You must be Jacob Freeman." He nodded, turning his hat in work-roughened hands. "I am pleased you made it safely. The journey from Boston must have been difficult." Difficult was an understatement. 3 weeks of rattling trains, suspicious glances from other passengers when they learned her destination, nights spent in questionable boarding houses where she clutched her meager belongings and prayed for dawn. But she simply said, "It was long, but I am here now." An awkward silence settled between them, heavy with all the things they did not know about each other, weighted with the magnitude of the commitment they had made through exchanged letters. Jacob cleared his throat and reached for her bag. "My wagon is just over here. The ranch is about an hour outside town. I thought we could stop by the general store if you need anything, and then head out before dark." Hannah followed him through the dusty streets of Fort Bridger, taking in the rough-hewn buildings, the muddy Main Street, the saloon from which raucous laughter spilled even at this early hour. Everything was so different from Boston, so raw and unfinished, as if the town itself was still deciding what it wanted to become. Women in practical calico dresses hurried past with market baskets, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their eyes holding a hardness that made Hannah wonder what trials had etched those expressions. The wagon was sturdy if simple, pulled by 2 horses that Jacob greeted with obvious affection, running his hand along their necks and murmuring soft words. He helped Hannah up onto the wooden seat with surprising gentleness, his hand steady on her elbow, and she felt the calluses rough against the thin fabric of her traveling dress. "I know this is not what you are accustomed to," Jacob said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "But I promise you will be safe on my land. I will do everything in my power to provide for you and protect you." Those were almost the exact words from his first letter, the one that had arrived at the boarding house, where Hannah had been working 16 hours a day just to afford a corner of a room shared with 3 other women. The letter had been formal but honest, explaining that Jacob Freeman owned a cattle ranch in Wyoming, that he was a widower of 2 years with no children, that he was looking for a wife to share his life and help build something lasting in this new territory. He had not promised riches or easy living, but he had promised respect and partnership, and that had been enough to make Hannah respond. They stopped at the general store, where Jacob insisted on buying her supplies she would need, practical things like flour and sugar and fabric for new dresses. The storekeeper, a round woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked Hannah up and down with undisguised curiosity. "Another mail-order bride, Jacob," she said, and there was something in her tone that made Hannah bristle. "That worked out so well the first time." Jacob's jaw tightened, and Hannah saw his knuckles go white on the counter, but his voice remained level when he spoke. "I will take 2 pounds of coffee as well, Mrs. Patterson." The woman sniffed but measured out the coffee, and Hannah pretended to study a display of ribbons while her mind raced. The first time. But Jacob had said he was a widower. Had he married someone else through correspondence? What had happened to make Mrs. Patterson's words drip with such venom? They loaded the supplies into the wagon without speaking, and as they left Fort Bridger behind, heading into the open country where the mountains rose purple in the distance, and the land rolled away in waves of gold and brown, Hannah finally gathered the courage to ask. "Your first wife," she began carefully, watching his profile. "Was she also from back east?" Jacob was silent for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer. The wagon wheels creaked, the horses' hooves struck a steady rhythm against the hard, packed earth, and overhead a hawk circled on thermal currents, hunting. "My first wife was Sarah," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "We married young, childhood sweethearts from the same town in Missouri. We came out here together 10 years ago with dreams of building something. She died 2 years ago of fever, nothing the doctor could do." Hannah absorbed this, relieved that his first marriage had at least been conventional. And Mrs. Patterson's comment about it working out well the first time. Now Jacob did look at her, and she saw pain in his eyes mixed with something else, something like determination. "Sarah hated it here. Every day, every hour. She hated the isolation, the hard work, the wind, the cold, the heat. She begged me to sell the ranch and move back to Missouri, but I was stubborn, convinced I could make her love it if I just worked harder, built her a nicer house, bought her prettier things. I was wrong. The fever took her, but this place broke her spirit long before that." The honesty of his words took Hannah's breath away. She had expected platitudes, reassurances, not this raw admission of failure. "Why did you not tell me this in your letters? Would you have come if I had?" He looked at her again, and this time his eyes held a challenge. "Would you have gotten on that train if I had written that my first wife died miserable and broken, hating every moment of our life together?" Hannah considered this, weighing honesty against self-preservation. "I do not know," she admitted, "but I appreciate you telling me now. I would rather know the truth than wonder." Something in Jacob's expression softened. "Then I will give you truth, Hannah Zimmerman. This life is hard. The winters are brutal, the summers are scorching, and there are days when the loneliness feels like it might swallow you whole. I cannot promise you comfort or society or any of the things you knew back east. But I can promise you that I will never lie to you, never raise my hand to you, and never stop trying to make this a home worth living in. And if you decide you cannot bear it, if you want to go back, I will give you the money for passage and let you go with no hard feelings." The words should have frightened her, should have confirmed all her worst fears about this desperate gamble she had taken. Instead, Hannah felt something inside her chest unknot slightly. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Freeman. I will give you truth in return. I had nothing in Boston but debts and disgrace. My father gambled away everything before he died, including my reputation by accepting loans from men who expected payment in forms I was not willing to give. Coming here is not running away from something I loved. It is running toward the possibility of something better. I am afraid, yes, but I am also willing to work hard and face whatever comes." A smile tugged at the corner of Jacob's mouth, the first real warmth she had seen from him. "Then we might just make a good team, Miss Zimmerman. And please, call me Jacob. Mr. Freeman makes me feel like my father." "Jacob," she tested the name, feeling the shape of it. "Then you must call me Hannah." The ranch appeared as they crested a gentle rise, and Hannah's first impression was of something both smaller and grander than she had imagined. The house was modest, a simple structure of weathered wood with a covered porch and stone chimney, but it sat in a valley where a creek wound through like a silver ribbon, and the land stretched out in all directions, dotted with grazing cattle. Mountains framed the scene to the west, their peaks already touched with early snow that caught the late afternoon light. "This is all yours?" Hannah asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "This is all ours," Jacob corrected gently. If we make this work." "I have 300 acres deeded and another 1,000 on open range. 200 head of cattle right now, though I am hoping to increase that next year. I have 2 men who work for me, Tom and Eddie. They bunk in the cabin over there." He pointed to a smaller structure near the barn. "They are good men, respectful. You will not have any trouble from them." As if summoned by the mention, 2 figures emerged from the barn. One was older, perhaps 50, with graying hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe early 20s, with an easy smile and curious eyes. Both men removed their hats as Jacob brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Hannah, this is Tom Walker and Eddie Morse. Boys, this is Miss Hannah Zimmerman. We are to be married tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word hit Hannah like a physical blow. She had known the marriage would happen quickly, of course, but somehow she had not thought it would be quite so immediate. But both men were nodding politely, and Tom was offering a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Pleased to meet you, miss," Tom said. "We have been working hard to get the place ready for you. Got the house all cleaned up and everything." Eddie was already unloading the supplies from the wagon, and Jacob helped Hannah down, his hands gentle on her waist. The touch sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach, and she felt her cheeks warm. This man was to be her husband tomorrow. This stranger with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. The inside of the house was simple but clean, just as Tom had promised. A main room served as kitchen and living space, with a fireplace dominating one wall and a table with 4 chairs near the window. 2 doors led off the main room, which Jacob explained were the bedroom and a small storage room. Everything was neat, almost Spartan, with none of the feminine touches that would have marked a woman's presence. "I thought you might want to arrange things as you see fit," Jacob said, almost shyly. "Add whatever makes you comfortable. I kept Sarah's things in a trunk in the storage room. If you want to use any of it, you are welcome to. If you would rather I got rid of it all, I understand." Hannah walked slowly around the room, running her fingers along the smooth wood of the table, examining the simple curtains at the windows, the neat stack of firewood beside the hearth. It was basic, yes, but it was clean and sturdy and honest, much like the man who owned it. "I would like to see what is in the trunk," she said carefully. "Not to replace her memory, but perhaps there are practical things that should not go to waste. And I would like to add my own touches as well, make it a home for both of us." Jacob's relief was palpable. "I will start making supper. I hope you are hungry. It is nothing fancy, just stew, but it is filling." They worked together in the kitchen, an awkward dance of strangers trying to share a space. Hannah found herself watching Jacob's movements, noting the easy competence with which he built up the fire, prepared the food, moved around the room. This was a man who had learned to care for himself, who did not expect to be waited on hand and foot. She found that quality surprisingly attractive. "Tell me about your family," Jacob said as he stirred the pot. "Your letters mentioned your father, but little else." Hannah settled into one of the chairs, grateful to sit after the long journey. "There is not much to tell. My mother died when I was young, just 8 years old. My father raised me as best he could, but he always had a weakness for cards and dice and horses that never quite ran fast enough. We got by when I was young, but the debts grew worse as I got older. After he died last year, I discovered just how bad things really were. No other family, a few distant cousins who wanted nothing to do with my father's debts or his daughter. I was working at a boarding house, trying to save enough to maybe open my own someday, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to explain about Mr. Bentley who owned the boarding house, about his increasingly insistent suggestions that she could work off her room and board in other ways. "But then your letter came, and it seemed like fate, perhaps, a chance to start over." Jacob ladled stew into bowls and brought them to the table, along with thick slices of bread. "I hope I can give you that fresh start. I know tomorrow is quick, but I thought it best. There will be talk in town otherwise, you staying here without being properly married. And I want to do this right, give you my name and my protection legally." "I understand." Hannah tasted the stew and was pleasantly surprised. It was simple but well seasoned, hearty and warming. "This is very good. Thank you. A man learns to cook when there is no one else to do it." He ate in silence for a moment, then continued. "I have arranged for the preacher to come out tomorrow afternoon. I thought we could keep it simple, just us and Tom and Eddie as witnesses, unless you want something more." Hannah shook her head. "Simple is fine. I have no one to invite, and I imagine you want the same. I have a few friends in town, but yes, I prefer to keep it quiet. We can have a proper celebration later if you want, once you have settled in and met more people." They finished the meal in companionable silence, and afterward, Hannah insisted on helping with the dishes despite Jacob's protests. As they worked side by side at the wash basin, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water, Hannah felt some of her fear begin to ease. This was still terrifyingly unknown, but perhaps it would not be as lonely as she had imagined. "I will sleep in the storage room tonight," Jacob said as they dried the last plate. "The bedroom is yours. I put fresh linens on the bed this morning." Hannah's face heated. "That is not necessary. I do not want to put you out of your own bed. It is just for tonight. Tomorrow night we will be married, and things will be different. But tonight I want you to rest easy, feel safe. There is a latch on the door if you want to use it. I will not take offense." The consideration in his words, the careful way he was trying to make this easier for her, made Hannah's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you, Jacob. That is very kind." He showed her to the bedroom, which was simply furnished with a large bed, a dresser, and a washstand. The bed did indeed have fresh linens, and someone had placed a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Hannah found herself blinking back tears at the thoughtful gesture. "Get some rest," Jacob said from the doorway. "Tomorrow is a big day, and you must be exhausted from your journey." Hannah wanted to say something more, to thank him properly for his kindness, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, and Jacob pulled the door closed behind him, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her fears and the wild Wyoming wind that whispered against the windows. She did not use the latch. The morning dawned clear and bright, and Hannah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the low of cattle in the distance. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. Wyoming, the ranch, Jacob. The wedding that would happen in just a few hours. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue calico that was nevertheless the finest thing she owned, and pinned up her dark hair with trembling fingers. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the main room empty but the smell of fresh coffee and bacon filling the air. A plate sat covered on the table with a note in rough handwriting. Gone to check the herd. Back by noon. Eat J. Hannah smiled at the simple message and settled down to a breakfast that was far better than anything she had managed to make for herself in recent months. Through the window, she could see Tom and Eddie working near the barn, and the normalcy of it, the simple routines of ranch life continuing regardless of the momentous change about to occur, was oddly comforting. She spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly, finding the trunk of Sarah's belongings in the storage room. Opening it felt like an intrusion at first, but Jacob had given his permission, and practical necessity won out over sentiment. Inside, she found dresses that had been made for a smaller woman, household linens in good condition, some books, and at the very bottom, a journal. Hannah hesitated over the journal, knowing she should not read it but unable to resist. She opened it to a random page and read another winter storm today. I think I will go mad with the isolation. Jacob is kind, but he does not understand. He loves this God-forsaken place and cannot see that it is killing me slowly, day by day. I dream of Missouri, of my mother's house, of neighbors close enough to visit without a day's journey. This is no life for a civilized woman. Hannah closed the journal quickly, her heart aching for the unhappy woman who had written those words. She understood now why Jacob had been so honest with her, why he had wanted to make sure she knew what she was choosing. Sarah's misery haunted this house like a ghost, and Jacob was terrified of making the same mistake twice. Well, Hannah would not make those same mistakes. She would not come to this place expecting it to be something it was not, would not resent Jacob for loving his land and his life here. She had chosen this with her eyes open, and she would make the best of it, find her own way to thrive in this wild, beautiful country. She carefully packed away the journal and selected some of the linens and a few other practical items, leaving the dresses and more personal things. Then she set about making the house more welcoming, arranging the wildflowers differently, placing the books on a shelf Jacob had built, adding small touches that made the space feel less lonely. Jacob returned just before noon, as promised, and Hannah's breath caught when she saw him. He had cleaned up, shaved, and changed into what were clearly his best clothes. His hair was still damp from washing, and his eyes held a mixture of nervousness and hope that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you." "You look very handsome as well." And he did, Hannah realized. In the harsh light of day, without the dust of travel obscuring him, Jacob Freeman was a genuinely attractive man, tall and strong with an honest face and those remarkable whiskey-colored eyes. The preacher arrived at 1 o'clock, a jovial man named Reverend Peters, who seemed genuinely pleased to be officiating the wedding. Tom and Eddie had also cleaned up and stood as witnesses. Both men grinning like this was the most exciting thing to happen on the ranch in months. The ceremony was simple and brief, conducted in the main room of the house with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Hannah's hands trembled as she repeated the vows, promising to love and honor this man she barely knew, but Jacob's grip was steady, his voice clear and certain as he made his own promises. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Peters declared. "Jacob, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was chaste, just a brief press of lips, but Hannah felt it down to her toes. Jacob's mouth was warm and soft, and the tenderness of the gesture made her eyes sting with tears. When they pulled apart, he was smiling, really smiling, and the transformation was remarkable. They shared a celebratory meal that Tom had helped prepare, simple but abundant, and the awkwardness of the morning melted away into something warmer, more relaxed. Eddie told stories about his previous ranch work that had everyone laughing, and Tom shared news from town that Jacob had missed. The Reverend stayed for the meal, and then departed with his payment and well wishes, leaving the four of them to continue the celebration. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Tom and Eddie made their excuses and headed back to their cabin, leaving Jacob and Hannah alone as husband and wife for the first time. The awkwardness returned immediately. Jacob cleared his throat and began collecting dishes from the table. "That went well, I think, the ceremony." "Yes, very well." Hannah helped him clear the table, hyper-aware of his presence in a way she had not been before. They were married now. This was her husband. Tonight they would share a bed. As if reading her thoughts, Jacob said quietly, "Hannah, I want you to know that I have no expectations for tonight. I know this is all very new and strange. We can take our time, get to know each other better first." Hannah paused in her dish washing, considering his words. Part of her was relieved, grateful for the reprieve. But another part, a part she had not known existed until this moment, was almost disappointed. She looked at Jacob, really looked at him, and saw the same uncertainty she felt reflected in his eyes. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "But we are married now, truly married. I do not want to begin our life together by avoiding the natural aspects of marriage. Unless—" She felt her cheeks flame. "Unless you would prefer to wait." Jacob's eyes darkened and he took a step toward her. "Hannah, I find you very attractive. From the moment I saw you on that platform, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. But I do not want you to feel pressured or frightened." "I am frightened," Hannah admitted. "But not of you. I am frightened of the unknown of all of this. But I think facing it together, as we promised, might be better than letting the fear grow larger in my imagination." Jacob reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather light. "We will face it side by side then, if that is what you want. Together. Always together." The words were an echo of his vows, and they sent warmth flooding through Hannah's chest. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and Jacob took her hand, leading her toward the bedroom. That night, in the darkness of the bedroom with the Wyoming wind singing outside and the stars blazing overhead, Jacob and Hannah began to learn each other. He was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when she cried out, it was not from fear but from the surprising sweetness of connection, the relief of no longer being alone. Afterward, lying in Jacob's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Hannah felt something unfamiliar bloom inside her. Not love yet, perhaps, but the seed of it, the possibility of it growing into something strong and lasting. "Are you all right?" Jacob murmured into her hair. "Yes," Hannah whispered back. "Better than all right. Are you?" She felt him smile against her temple. "Much better than all right. Thank you, Hannah, for taking this chance, for being brave enough to come all this way. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. For being honest with me. For promising we would face everything together." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Hannah did not dream of falling. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Hannah threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life, rising early to make breakfast for Jacob and the hands, spending her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and slowly making the house feel like a home. She planted a small garden near the house, even though it was late in the season, just to have something growing, something she could tend and nurture. Jacob was patient with her ignorance about ranch life, teaching her about the cattle and the horses, showing her the boundaries of their land, introducing her to the realities of frontier existence. She learned to shoot, though she hated the noise and the recoil, because Jacob insisted she needed to know how to protect herself. She learned to ride, taking to it more naturally than shooting, and soon was helping Tom and Eddie with smaller tasks around the ranch. The relationship between Jacob and Hannah deepened slowly, naturally, like roots growing down into good soil. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Jacob told her about his hopes for the ranch, his plans to build a bigger house someday, maybe even start a small town on part of his land. Hannah shared her love of books and learning, her secret desire to maybe teach school someday if the opportunity arose. Physical intimacy grew easier too, more natural. Jacob continued to be gentle and considerate, but Hannah was no longer nervous. She found herself looking forward to the nights, to the closeness and warmth, to the way Jacob would hold her afterward, and murmur sleepy endearments into her hair. It was nearly a month after the wedding when the first real test of their partnership arrived. Hannah was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. She looked up to see 3 riders approaching at a gallop, and her stomach clenched with instinctive fear. Jacob had gone into town for supplies with Tom, leaving her alone with Eddie, who was somewhere out checking fence lines. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Hannah's first impression was of dirt and danger. These were not friendly neighbors paying a social call. These were hard men with harder eyes, and the way they looked at her made her skin crawl. "Well, well," the leader said, dismounting with a casual grace that did not match the menace in his eyes. "Jacob got himself a new bride. Heard about that in town. Pretty little thing, are not you?" Hannah straightened her spine and tried to keep her voice steady. "My husband is not here right now, but he will be back soon. Is there something I can help you with?" The man laughed, and his companions joined in. "Hear that, boys? She is asking if she can help us. That is real sweet." He took a step closer, and Hannah fought the urge to back away. "Name's Clayton. Your husband and I have some unfinished business. See, some of his cattle have been wandering onto land I claim, and I do not take kindly to that." "I am sure that is a mistake," Hannah said, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Jacob is very careful about keeping his herd on his own land." "That's so." Clayton was close now, close enough that Hannah could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Well, maybe you and I could work out some sort of agreement while we wait for him to get back. I am sure we could find a way to make me feel compensated for my trouble." His hand reached out toward her face, and Hannah reacted without thinking. She had learned to shoot, yes, but she had also grown up in rough neighborhoods in Boston where a girl needed to know how to defend herself. She drove her knee up hard, catching Clayton in a place that made him double over with a howl of pain. The other 2 men started forward, but a gunshot cracked through the air, freezing everyone in place. Eddie stood near the barn, rifle in hand, looking more serious than Hannah had ever seen him. "I suggest you gentlemen get back on your horses and leave," Eddie said, his voice steady despite his youth. "Mrs. Freeman is not interested in your company, and neither is Mr. Freeman." Clayton struggled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This is not over. You tell Jacob that I am not done with him. His water rights, his land, all of it will be mine before the year is out." They mounted and rode off at a gallop, leaving Hannah shaking in the yard. Eddie hurried over, his face pale. "Are you all right, Mrs. Freeman? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine, thanks to you, and please call me Hannah." Her legs suddenly felt like water, and she sat down hard on the ground, her dress billowing around her. "Who was that man?" Eddie sat down beside her, still clutching his rifle. "Rex Clayton. He owns the ranch to the east, or claims to anyway. There is some dispute about the boundary lines and water rights. He has been making trouble for Jacob for over a year now, ever since Jacob filed claim to the creek that runs through the property." "Why has Jacob not mentioned this to me?" Eddie shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Probably did not want to worry you, especially being so new here and all. But Clayton is bad news, Mrs. Freeman. Hannah. He has a reputation for getting what he wants one way or another. Hannah's hands were still shaking, but beneath the fear was a growing anger. Jacob had promised they would face everything together, side by side, but he had kept this from her. This was not a minor detail. This was a serious threat to their safety and livelihood. When Jacob returned late that afternoon, Hannah was waiting for him on the porch, her arms crossed, her expression stormy. He took one look at her face and his own expression darkened. What happened? Rex Clayton happened. He and 2 of his men rode in here while you were gone, making threats and suggestions that were entirely inappropriate. Jacob went white, then red with fury. Did he touch you? If he laid one hand on you, I will kill him. Eddie handled it. I handled it, actually. But that is not the point, Jacob. The point is that you did not tell me about this. You promised we would face everything together, but you kept this threat from me. Jacob removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. I did not want to frighten you. You were already dealing with so much, adjusting to a new place, a new life. I thought I could handle Clayton, keep him away from you. That is not your decision to make alone. Hannah stood and walked to where Jacob stood by the wagon. I am not Sarah. I am not going to break because life here is hard or dangerous. But I cannot help, cannot be a true partner if you hide things from me. If we are going to make this work, really work, you have to trust me with the truth, even when it is scary. Jacob looked at her for a long moment, and Hannah saw the war playing out in his eyes, the fear of repeating past mistakes battling with the need to trust, to truly share his life with someone. Finally, he nodded. You are right. I am sorry. I was trying to protect you, but instead, I treated you like you could not handle the truth. That was wrong. He reached out and took her hand. Let me tell you everything. About Clayton, about the water rights, about all of it, and then we will figure out together how to handle it. They sat on the porch as the sun set, and Jacob explained the whole complicated situation. The creek that ran through their property was the only reliable water source for miles. Jacob had legal claim to it, but Clayton insisted the old boundaries were different, that he had rights to at least half the water. Without that water, Clayton's cattle would have to be driven much farther to drink, making his operation much less profitable. So he had been making threats, trying to intimidate Jacob into giving up his claim or selling out entirely. Why not just let him have some of the water? Hannah asked. If there is enough for both ranches. There might be enough in good years, but these last few years have been dry. If I let him have a claim now and then we hit a drought year, my herd could die off while his thrives. I cannot take that risk. This ranch is everything I have, Hannah. Everything we have now. Hannah squeezed his hand. Then we will fight for it. Legally properly, but we will not let him bully us into giving up what is rightfully ours. Jacob looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. You are not afraid, not thinking about running back to Boston. I am terrified, Hannah admitted, but I am not running. You are my husband, this is my home, and I will be damned if I let some whiskey-soaked bully take it from us without a fight. Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I do not deserve you, Hannah Freeman, but I am grateful every day that you took a chance on me. We took a chance on each other, Hannah corrected, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely Jacob. And we will see it through together, whatever comes. What came was a lawyer from town, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Reynolds, whom Jacob hired to review the land claims and water rights. Reynolds spent 2 weeks examining documents, surveying boundaries, and interviewing old-timers who remembered the original settlements. His conclusion was definitive. Jacob's claim was legal and clear. The water rights were his, and Clayton had no legal ground to stand on. But legal ground and actual ground were two different things in Wyoming territory in 1878. Clayton had men and guns and a willingness to use both. Jacob had right on his side, but that would not stop bullets if it came to violence. "We need to be prepared," Jacob said one evening as they sat at the table discussing their options. "Clayton is not going to accept Reynolds' findings. He will escalate." "Then we get help," Hannah said firmly. "You have friends in town, other ranchers who must face similar problems. Surely they would stand with you against someone like Clayton who is trying to steal what is not his." Jacob nodded slowly. "There are a few who might help. Ben Morrison over at the Triple Bar, Sarah's cousin actually. We have not been close since she died, but he is a good man. And the Harris brothers, they run cattle to the south. If I could get them to sign statements supporting my claim, show that Clayton is trying to intimidate his way to water rights, it might be enough to get the territorial authorities involved." Over the next few weeks, Jacob and Hannah worked together, building a case and building alliances. Hannah discovered she had a talent for organization and persuasion, skills she had developed managing the boarding house in Boston. She helped Jacob prepare documents, rehearse his arguments, and even accompanied him on some of his visits to neighboring ranches. Meeting Ben Morrison was awkward at first. He was in his late 30s, a quiet man with Sarah's same dark hair and blue eyes, and Hannah could see the memories haunting him when he first saw Jacob. But he was professional and, once he heard about Clayton's tactics, firmly on their side. "That man is poison," Ben said flatly. "He has been trying to expand his holdings for years, does not care whose toes he steps on or whose rights he tramples. If we let him get away with this with you, Jacob, he will just move on to the next target. We need to make a stand." The Harris brothers were equally supportive, and soon Jacob had a coalition of 5 ranchers willing to present a united front against Clayton's claims. They hired Reynolds to file formal complaints with the territorial authorities and requested an official survey of the disputed boundaries. Clayton's response was swift and violent. One night, someone set fire to Jacob's hay barn. Fortunately, Tom spotted the flames early and they managed to put it out before it spread to the other buildings, but the message was clear: back down or face worse. Jacob wanted to confront Clayton directly, wanted to ride over to his ranch and demand satisfaction, but Hannah talked him down. "That is exactly what he wants," she argued, holding Jacob's face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. "He wants you to lose your temper, do something stupid that makes you look like the aggressor. We have the law on our side, Jacob. We have friends and allies and the truth. Do not throw that away because he is trying to goad you into a fight. He burned our barn, Hannah. He could have killed someone. What if the house had been next? What if you had been hurt? But I was not, and neither were you. We will rebuild the barn, we will increase our vigilance, but we will not stoop to his level." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "When did you become so wise?" "I have always been wise," Hannah said, trying to lighten the mood. "You just have not been married to me long enough to fully appreciate it yet." The territorial authorities finally arrived in late November, just as the first serious snows began to fall. A surveyor named Mr. Watkins spent 3 days in the bitter cold, measuring and marking boundaries with official posts. His findings confirmed what Reynolds had determined. Jacob's claim was correct, and Clayton had no legal right to the disputed water. Watkins delivered his official report in town, with both Jacob and Clayton present along with several witnesses. Clayton's face turned purple with rage as he listened to the findings. "This is garbage," he snarled. "Bought and paid for by Freeman's money. Watkins, A dignified man with steel gray hair and no tolerance for nonsense stared Clayton down. "Sir, I am a federal employee, and I resent the implication that I can be bribed. These findings are based on the original survey markers and legal documents on file. If you wish to dispute them, you may file an appeal with the territorial government, but I assure you it will be rejected." Clayton stormed out of the meeting, but not before shooting Jacob a look of pure hatred. "This is not over, Freeman. Not by a long shot." Jacob and Hannah rode home through falling snow, wrapped in blankets in the wagon, feeling both victorious and uneasy. They had won the legal battle, but Hannah could not shake the feeling that the real fight was still ahead. Winter settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. The mountains disappeared behind walls of white, the creek froze solid, and the temperature dropped so low that water left out overnight would be solid ice by morning. Hannah had never experienced cold like this, the kind that seeped through walls and blankets and settled into bones. But the house was warm, and the company was warmer. Jacob had been right about the isolation. Some days the snow was so heavy they could not see the barn from the house, and it would be a week or more between trips to town. But Hannah found she did not mind the way Sarah apparently had. She spent her days reading, sewing, cooking, and talking with Jacob during the long evenings when there was little work that could be done outside. They grew closer during those winter months, the relationship deepening from partnership and attraction into something richer and more profound. Hannah found herself falling in love with her husband, truly in love, in a way she had not thought possible when she first stepped off that train in Fort Bridger. She loved the way Jacob would come in from the cold and seek her out first thing, kissing her before even removing his coat. She loved how he would read to her in the evenings, his deep voice stumbling occasionally over unfamiliar words but persisting because he knew she enjoyed it. She loved waking up wrapped in his arms, safe and warm while the wind howled outside. And Jacob made it clear he was falling in love with her too. In the small gestures, the tender words, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. On her birthday in January, he surprised her with a beautiful bound book of poetry he had ordered from back east, and Hannah cried because no one had ever given her such a thoughtful gift. "I love you, Hannah," Jacob said that night, holding her close. "I did not think I would ever say those words again after Sarah, did not think I could feel this way, but you have brought my heart back to life." "I love you too," Hannah whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." But love, as Hannah was learning, did not make life simple or safe. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Clayton made his final play. It started with cattle going missing. Just a few at first, easy to explain as strays wandering off or getting stuck in gullies. But then more disappeared, and Jacob found tracks suggesting they had been driven off deliberately. Then came the poisoned water hole, which killed 3 head before they figured out what had happened. Then fence lines cut in the night, allowing cattle to wander onto dangerous ground. Each incident alone might have been dismissed, but together they painted a clear picture of sabotage. Clayton was trying to bleed them dry, destroy their herd and their livelihood inch by inch. Jacob was exhausted and frustrated, spending more and more time riding the boundaries, trying to protect what was his. Tom and Eddie were equally worn down, and Hannah worried constantly, terrified that one of these men she had come to care for would be hurt or worse. The breaking point came on a cold April morning when Eddie did not return from his dawn patrol. Jacob and Tom went looking for him and found him unconscious near the eastern boundary, beaten severely. He had been jumped by multiple assailants, and though he had fought back, the odds had been too great. They carried Eddie back to the house, and Hannah tended his injuries with shaking hands, cleaning wounds and bandaging ribs that were certainly broken. Eddie drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling apologies for not fighting harder, for not protecting the ranch better. "This has to stop," Hannah said to Jacob that night after Eddie had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep. "Before someone is killed." "I know." Jacob looked haggard, older than his years. "But what can I do? The law moves slowly, and Clayton is careful not to leave evidence that directly ties him to these attacks." Hannah thought about this, turning the problem over in her mind like a puzzle. "Then we need to catch him in the act. Set a trap, get proof that he is behind this, evidence solid enough that the authorities cannot ignore." "That is dangerous, Hannah. These men are not playing games. Neither are we. This is our home, our life. I am not going to sit here and watch him destroy it piece by piece while we do nothing but react." She took Jacob's hands in hers. "We face it together, remember? Side by side. So let us be smart, be strategic, but let us fight back." They hatched a plan over the next few days, working with Tom while Eddie recovered. They would spread word in town that Jacob was moving a valuable breeding bull to a new pasture, making it seem like an easy target for theft. Then they would stake out the area, hoping Clayton's men would take the bait and they could catch them in the act. It was risky and possibly foolish, but doing nothing felt more dangerous. At least this way they were taking action, controlling the situation rather than being controlled by it. The trap was set for the night of April 15th. Jacob, Tom, and several trusted friends from neighboring ranches hid in positions around the pasture where the bull was supposedly being kept. Hannah wanted to be there too, but Jacob drew the line there. "Please, Hannah, stay at the house. If something goes wrong, I need to know you are safe. I cannot focus if I am worried about you being in the line of fire." Hannah wanted to argue, but she saw the genuine fear in his eyes and relented. "Fine. But you better come back to me, Jacob Freeman. I did not come all this way and fall in love with you just to become a widow before my first anniversary." He kissed her, deep and desperate. "I will come back. I promise. And after this is over, after we have finally dealt with Clayton, I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "I am already happy," Hannah said, touching his face. "Just come home safe, and that is all I need." Jacob rode out as the sun was setting, and Hannah settled in to wait, which was somehow worse than any active danger could have been. She tried to read, tried to sew, tried to do anything to keep her mind occupied, but her thoughts kept circling back to all the things that could go wrong. The hours crawled by. 9 o'clock, 10, 11. Midnight came and went, and still no word. Hannah paced the house, prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore, and tried not to imagine the worst. It was nearly 2 in the morning when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching. She grabbed the rifle Jacob had insisted she keep loaded by the door and positioned herself near the window, ready to defend the house if needed. But it was Jacob's voice that called out, "Hannah, it is me. We are back." She flung open the door and ran out into the yard, not caring that she was in her nightgown or that the night air was freezing. Jacob dismounted and caught her in his arms, and she could feel him trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I am fine. We are all fine." "And we got them, Hannah. We caught 3 of Clayton's men red-handed trying to steal the bull. Ben and the Harris brothers have them tied up in their barn, and we sent for the marshal at first light." Relief flooded through Hannah so intensely that her knees buckled, and Jacob had to hold her up. "Thank God. Oh, thank God." The men who had been caught sang like canaries when faced with serious jail time, implicating Clayton in not just the attempted theft, but in all the other incidents over the past months. The marshal arrested Clayton a week later, And though he tried to bluster his way out of it, the evidence was overwhelming. He was transported to the territorial capital to stand trial, and his ranch was put up for sale to cover legal fees and restitution. The nightmare was finally over. Spring unfolded across the ranch in a riot of wildflowers and green grass, and with Clayton's threat removed, Jacob and Hannah could finally focus on building rather than just defending. They rebuilt the barn, bigger and better than before. They expanded the herd with the money from the settlement. They even began planning additions to the house, maybe extra rooms for the future. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Hannah took Jacob's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart fluttering with nervous excitement. Jacob looked at her, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Are you? I am going to have a baby, our baby, probably late December or early January, the doctor thinks." Jacob's whoop of joy could probably be heard all the way in Fort Bridger. He picked Hannah up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby! We are going to have a baby! Hannah, that is the most wonderful news." That night, lying in bed with Jacob's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, Hannah thought about how far she had come since that terrified woman stepping off the train 9 months ago. She had been so afraid of the unknown then, so unsure of whether she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But Jacob had been right. They had faced the unknown together, side by side, and it had made all the difference. The challenges had been real and serious, but they had met them as partners, growing stronger together rather than being broken apart. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob murmured sleepily. "About how afraid I was when I first arrived, about how that fear seems almost silly now." It was not silly. Fear of the unknown is natural, but you were brave enough to face it anyway, and that is what matters. He pulled her closer. "I am so grateful you chose to come here to give us a chance. You have made me happier than I ever thought I could be again." "We made each other happy," Hannah corrected. "That is how partnership works." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Hannah bloomed with health and happiness, and Jacob was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly worrying about her lifting anything heavier than a dishcloth or walking too far from the house. In October, they made a trip to Fort Bridger to stock up on supplies before the winter snows made travel difficult. Walking down the main street, so different from that first day when Hannah had been alone and terrified, she felt a surge of pride and belonging. This was her town now, her community. People greeted her by name, asked after her health and the baby, treated her like she belonged. They ran into Mrs. Patterson at the general store, the same woman who had made that snide comment about mail-order brides on Hannah's first day. The woman looked Hannah up and down, taking in her obvious pregnancy and the way Jacob's hand rested protectively on her back. "Well, Mrs. Freeman, you certainly seem to have settled in well," Mrs. Patterson said, and this time there was no venom in her tone, just genuine observation. "I have indeed, Mrs. Patterson. Wyoming has proven to be everything I hoped for and more." The woman actually smiled. "I am glad to hear it. Jacob deserves some happiness after everything he has been through. And between you and me, watching you stand up to Rex Clayton was the most exciting thing this town has seen in years. You have got spirit, girl. Wyoming needs more women like you." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Hannah felt absurdly pleased by the encounter. She had won over the town gossip. She had really, truly made a place for herself here. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. By December, they were snowed in more often than not, but Jacob had prepared meticulously. ensuring they had more than enough supplies to last until spring. Tom and Eddie spent most of their time in the bunkhouse during the worst weather, only venturing out when absolutely necessary. Hannah's time came on a bitter cold night in early January, 2 weeks before the doctor had predicted. The snow was too deep for anyone to ride to town for help, so they had to manage on their own. Tom rode through a blizzard to fetch the closest neighbor, Mrs. Harris, who had experience with birthing. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Hannah was certain she would not survive. But Jacob never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement and love. When the baby finally arrived just before dawn, filling the house with healthy, indignant cries, Hannah wept with relief and joy. Mrs. Harris cleaned and wrapped the infant, then placed the baby in Hannah's arms. "You have a son," she announced with a tired smile. "A big, healthy boy." Jacob looked down at his son with an expression of such pure love and wonder that it made Hannah's heart ache. "He is perfect. Hannah, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Jacob's father, and the baby quickly became the center of their universe. Jacob was a doting father, spending every spare moment with his son, and watching the two of them together made Hannah fall in love with her husband all over again. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was never easy, and there were hard seasons and setbacks. But Jacob and Hannah faced each obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. 2 years after James was born, they welcomed a daughter named Emma, and 3 years after that, another son they named Thomas after Tom Walker, who had become like family. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Jacob building on room after room until it was twice the size it had been when Hannah first arrived. The ranch prospered too, growing from 300 acres to over 1,000, with a herd that numbered in the many hundreds. They hired more hands, built a proper bunkhouse, and even established a small community on part of their land where other families settled, creating the beginnings of the town Jacob had once dreamed about. Through it all, Jacob and Hannah remained devoted to each other and to the partnership they had built. On their 10th anniversary, standing on the porch of their much-expanded house, watching their 3 children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Leaving Boston, taking such a risk on a stranger." Hannah turned to look at her husband, this man she loved more with each passing year. His hair was touched with gray now, and there were more lines around his eyes, but he was still the same steady, honest, loving man who had promised her they would face everything side by side. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "Coming here, marrying you, building this life together, has been the greatest adventure of my life. I was so afraid of the unknown when I first arrived, but you showed me that facing it together makes all the difference." Jacob pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding night 12 years ago. "You made me believe in second chances, Hannah. You took a broken man and a lonely ranch and turned them into a home full of love and laughter. I fall more in love with you every single day." Their children's laughter rang out across the yard, mixing with the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and the wind singing through the mountains. The sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, the same colors it had been on that first evening when Hannah had stood on this porch, terrified and uncertain about her future. She had been right to be afraid. The unknown was frightening, the challenges real and sometimes overwhelming. But she had also been right to take the leap, to trust in Jacob's promise that they would face everything together, because side by side, they had not just survived. They had thrived, building something beautiful and lasting out of courage and commitment and love. Years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and celebrations. James grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind. Emma was spirited and independent, already declaring at age 8 that she would run the ranch herself someday. Little Thomas was the baby of the family, sweet-natured and gentle, with a gift for working with animals that amazed everyone. The town that had begun as just a few families on their land grew into a proper community. They built a school, and Hannah finally realized her dream of teaching, spending 3 days a week educating the children of the area. A church followed, then a proper general store, and soon Fort Bridger had competition as the nearest center of civilization. Tom Walker married a widow from town and built a house on ranch land, becoming not just Jacob's foreman but his closest friend and advisor. Eddie Morse eventually moved on to start his own ranch with money he had saved and a loan from Jacob, but he remained a frequent visitor and honorary uncle to the Freeman children. On their 20th anniversary, Jacob surprised Hannah with a trip to Boston. She had not been back since leaving, and she approached the journey with mixed feelings. But walking those familiar streets with Jacob by her side, showing him where she had grown up and worked, she felt nothing but gratitude for the path her life had taken. Boston seemed small now, crowded and dirty compared to the wide open spaces of Wyoming. She did not miss it at all. Her home, her heart, her whole life was in the West with Jacob and their children. They returned to the ranch in time for spring branding, and Hannah threw herself back into the work of the ranch and the school with renewed energy. She was 42 now, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and lines around her eyes, but she felt more vibrant and alive than she had at 22, when she had first stepped off that train. Jacob, at 50, was still strong and vital, though he had begun to delegate more of the heavy work to James and the other hands. He spent more time on the business side of ranching, negotiating contracts and managing the books, work that Hannah often helped with in the evenings. They had built something remarkable together, a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. The ranch would pass to their children and their children's children, a testament to what could be accomplished when two people committed to facing life's challenges together. On a warm summer evening when Hannah was 45, she and Jacob took a rare moment away from the constant activity of the ranch to ride up into the hills, just the two of them. They sat on a blanket watching the stars come out, the same stars that had blazed overhead on their wedding night all those years ago. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Hannah asked, nestled against Jacob's side. "When I told you I was afraid of the unknown." "I said we would face it side by side," Jacob replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "And we have, every day since. We have indeed." Hannah tilted her face up to kiss him, still feeling that flutter in her stomach that his kisses had always produced. "Thank you, Jacob Freeman, for being exactly the partner you promised to be, for never giving up on us, even when things were hard. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on a lonely rancher and his wild dream. You have made all my dreams come true, Hannah, and given me more than I ever dared to hope for." They stayed on the hill until the moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light across the land they had built together. In the distance, they could see the lights of their house, warm and welcoming, where their children slept safely. Further out, the scattered lights of the growing town twinkled like earthbound stars. This was their kingdom, built not with conquest or force, but with love and hard work and unwavering partnership. Every fence post, every building, every thriving head of cattle represented hours of shared labor and shared dreams. The school where Hannah taught, The church where they worshiped, the homes of their friends and neighbors, all of it was part of the tapestry they had woven together. As they rode back down to the house, Hannah thought about the frightened young woman she had been, standing on that train platform with nothing but a carpet bag and a desperate hope. If she could go back and speak to that version of herself, what would she say? She would tell her to be brave. She would tell her that the unknown is terrifying, yes, but also full of possibility. She would tell her that choosing to face fear rather than being paralyzed by it is the most important decision she would ever make. But most of all, she would tell her that she was about to meet a man named Jacob Freeman, and that he would keep every promise he made, that he would stand beside her through every trial and triumph, and that together they would build a love story worthy of the wild, beautiful land they called home. The children grew and eventually began families of their own. James married a rancher's daughter from the next county and brought her to live on the ranch, building a house just over the hill from his parents. He took over more and more of the daily operations, allowing Jacob to finally slow down a bit, though he never fully retired. Emma, true to her childhood declaration, became deeply involved in running the ranch as well, shocking some of the more traditional neighbors with her business acumen and her refusal to conform to expected gender roles. She eventually married a lawyer from Fort Bridger who was smart enough to appreciate her strength rather than be threatened by it. Thomas, the gentle youngest child, surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, going back east to study, and then returning to set up practice in the growing town. His expertise made him invaluable not just to his family's ranch, but to all the surrounding ranches as well. Grandchildren arrived in a joyful rush, filling the house with noise and laughter once again. Jacob proved to be an even more doting grandfather than he had been a father, spending hours telling stories and teaching the little ones to ride and rope. Hannah watched it all with deep contentment, seeing the legacy they had built extending into the future. Her school had educated a whole generation of children who had gone on to become teachers, doctors, ranchers, and business owners. The town that had started on their land was now incorporated, with its own mayor and council, a thriving center of commerce and community. On their 30th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration, recognizing the role Jacob and Hannah had played in its founding and growth. Standing before the crowd of friends and neighbors, many of whom Hannah had taught as children, Jacob gave a short speech. 30 years ago, I was a lonely widower on a struggling ranch, convinced my best years were behind me. Then a brave young woman stepped off a train in Fort Bridger, willing to take a chance on a stranger and an uncertain future. Hannah, you have been my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. Everything good in my life flows from the day you agreed to marry me. Thank you for 30 years of facing the unknown together, side by side. Hannah could not speak through her tears, so she simply kissed him, not caring that half the town was watching, wanting everyone to see the depth of love that had only grown stronger with time. The years rolled on, bringing both joy and sorrow. Tom Walker passed away peacefully in his sleep at 75, and Jacob mourned the loss of his friend deeply. But Tom's children remained on the ranch, continuing their father's legacy, and his grandchildren played with the Freeman grandchildren. The families intertwined so completely, it was hard to say where one ended and another began. Jacob's health began to fail when he was in his early 70s, his strong body finally succumbing to decades of hard work and harsh Wyoming winters. Hannah nursed him tenderly, and he faced his declining strength with the same steady courage he had shown in everything else. On a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the air smelled of new grass and possibility, Jacob called Hannah to sit beside him on the porch. He was too weak to do much anymore, but he still loved to sit outside and look at the land he had devoted his life to building. "I need to tell you something," he said, taking her hand in his. Even now, fragile and failing, his grip was steady. "I am not afraid, Hannah. I have lived a full life, a better life than I ever deserved because you were brave enough to face the unknown with me. I am not afraid of what comes next because I know I am leaving behind something good and lasting. Our children, our grandchildren, this land, this community, all of it will continue long after I am gone." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to smile. "You are not going anywhere yet, Jacob Freeman. We still have time." "Not as much as I would like," he said gently. "But however much we have left, I want to spend it telling you how much I love you, how grateful I am for every single day we have had together." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands and watching the world they had built together continue its busy dance. Children played in the yard, cattle grazed in the distance, and the mountains stood eternal and unchanging against the blue Wyoming sky. Jacob lasted another 2 months, long enough to see the birth of his 8th grandchild, long enough to celebrate one more anniversary with Hannah, long enough to tell each of his children and grandchildren how much he loved them. He died on a warm July evening with Hannah holding his hand, their children gathered around, and the setting sun painting the room in shades of gold. His last words were "Thank you," whispered to Hannah with his final breath. Hannah mourned deeply, but without regret. They had 43 years together, 43 years of partnership and love and shared dreams realized. Not many people could say they had been so blessed. She continued on, still teaching at the school, still involved in the ranch's operation though James had long since taken over full management, still a vital part of the community she and Jacob had helped build. The grief eased with time, softened by happy memories, and the knowledge that Jacob had died content, knowing his life had mattered. On what would have been their 50th anniversary, Hannah stood on the porch of the house Jacob had built for her, looking out at land that now supported 3 Freeman family homes and dozens of other families in the surrounding town. The small ranch Jacob had struggled to maintain alone had become a thriving operation spanning thousands of acres. The isolated homestead where she had arrived as a frightened mail-order bride was now the heart of a bustling community. Her children were successful and happy, her grandchildren were growing up strong and smart, and the legacy she and Jacob had built together would continue for generations. The school she had founded now had 3 teachers and over 50 students. The town had a population of nearly 800, with more arriving every year. As the sun set, painting the mountains in the colors she had grown to love so much, Hannah felt Jacob's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside her. She could hear his voice in the wind, promising her they would face everything together, side by side. And they had. Through challenges and triumphs, through fear and courage, through every unknown tomorrow, they had faced it all together. What had begun as a desperate gamble by 2 lonely people had grown into a love story for the ages, proof that the greatest adventures often begin with the courage to face the unknown. Hannah lived to be 84, sharp-minded and beloved until the end. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Jacob had created. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, people whose lives she had touched as a teacher, a neighbor, a friend, and a role model. They buried her beside Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Wyoming sky they had both loved so much. The headstone was simple, bearing just their names and dates, but if you looked closely, you could see the inscription Jacob had requested before he died. Side by side, We faced the unknown and found everything we needed. And in the years that followed, as the Freeman Ranch continued to thrive and grow, as great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren carried on the legacy, the story of Jacob and Hannah became the stuff of family legend. The tale of the mail-order bride who feared the unknown and the rancher who promised they would face it together, and how that promise became the foundation of something beautiful and lasting. Because in the end, that is what love is, not the absence of fear, but the courage to face fear together. Not the promise of an easy road, but the commitment to walk whatever road comes, side by side, facing each challenge and celebrating each triumph as partners. Hannah and Jacob understood that truth, lived it every day of their life together, and built something that would echo through generations. Their story was a testament to the power of courage, commitment, and the transformative magic of facing the unknown together. The ranch still stands today, still operated by Freeman descendants, still a testament to what two brave people built when they chose partnership over fear, love over loneliness, and faith in each other over the terror of the unknown. And on warm summer evenings when the wind whispers through the valley and the sun sets gold and purple over the mountains, locals swear you can still feel the presence of Jacob and Hannah, forever side by side, forever facing the unknown together, forever home.